Harlem, 1941. A mobster named Vincent Calibri walked into the Apollo Theater and spit directly in Bumpy Johnson's face in front of 200 witnesses. Bumpy didn't pull his gun. He just said 4 words, "Count to 47." What happened in the next 72 hours that made the entire underworld bow to one man? To understand how it all led here, we go back to where it truly began. Apollo Theater, Harlem, March 8th, 1941, 10 o'clock at night. The spit ran down Bumpy Johnson's left cheek. Slow, methodical, like everything else that would happen in the next 47 minutes. 200 people watched. Not one of them moved. Not one of them breathed. The jazz band had stopped mid-note. Ella Fitzgerald stepped back from the microphone, her hand frozen at her throat. Forks hung in the air. Conversations died before the words could form. Because everyone in that room understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a declaration of war. And wars in Harlem didn't end with handshakes and apologies. They ended with bodies. They ended with blood painting the sidewalks red for blocks. Vincent "Vinny Spit" Calibri stood over Bumpy Johnson's table, 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle and arrogance, smiling like a man who just won the lottery. He leaned closer, close enough that his cologne mixed with the smell of expensive Italian leather and cheap whiskey. "Got nothing to say," Vinny's voice carried across the silent room. "No threats, no tough guy act." Bumpy reached for his napkin, white linen pressed that morning by Mamie's careful hands. He wiped his face slowly, methodically, the way a man might clean his reading glasses or fold a newspaper. Every movement precise, calculated. His dark eyes never left Vinny's face. The room held its breath. What nobody in that theater knew, what the 200 witnesses couldn't possibly understand, was that in 72 hours they would find Vincent Calibri scattered across 7 different locations in 3 different boroughs. 47 pieces. Exactly 47. 1 for each person, Bumpy had counted in the theater that night, plus 1 for Mamie sitting beside him in her green dress, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. This is the story of how a man who got spit in the face became a legend. This is the story of 47 pieces and the cold calculation that made them necessary. But to understand what happened that night at the Apollo, you need to understand what happened 3 weeks earlier in a smoke-filled room in Little Italy, where desperate men made desperate plans. The social club on Mulberry Street didn't have a name, didn't need one. Everyone who mattered knew what happened behind those heavy oak doors. This was where the Genovese family made decisions, where territories were carved up like birthday cakes, where men who asked too many questions stopped asking anything at all. February 17th, 1941, 9:30 at night. Michael Genovese paced the length of the back room, his footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed 3 decades of criminal history. 8 captains sat around a mahogany table that cost more than most Harlem families made in a year. Cigar smoke hung in the air like morning fog over the East River. Michael stopped pacing. His hands gripped the back of an empty chair, knuckles white against the dark wood. "Harlem is making us look weak." His voice was quiet, controlled. The kind of quiet that meant someone was about to get hurt. "We control Brooklyn. We control the Bronx. We control Queens. But a black man runs Harlem, and we can't do a damn thing about it." The captains shifted in their seats. They'd all tried. They'd sent negotiators. Bumpy had refused every offer. They'd sent enforcers. Bumpy had sent them back in ambulances if he sent them back at all. They'd tried bribing politicians, buying judges, pressuring police captains. Bumpy had better connections than all of them combined. "My brother writes to me from Italy every week," Michael continued. "You know what he says. He says I'm an embarrassment. He says if I can't handle one neighborhood, one man, then maybe I'm not fit to run this family." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Vincent Calibri stood up from the corner where he'd been leaning against the wall. He was younger than most of the men in the room, 28 years old, with the kind of confidence that came from never losing a fight. 7 men had made the mistake of crossing Vincent Calibri. All 7 were dead, quick, brutal, efficient. "I'll make him kneel," Vinny said. Michael turned to face him. "You got a plan." Public humiliation. Vinny walked to the table, placed both hands flat on the polished surface. "We don't need to kill him. Not yet. We need to show Harlem that their king bleeds like everyone else. Show them he's not untouchable." One of the older captains, a man named Salvatore, who'd been in the game since Prohibition, shook his head. "You try that, Bumpy will put you in the ground before sunrise." Vinny smiled. "Not if he can't. Not if starting a war with us costs him more than swallowing his pride." Michael leaned forward. "Keep talking." The Apollo Theater, Friday night, packed house. I walk up to his table in front of all his people in his territory and I spit in his face. Vinny's smile widened. If he does nothing, Harlem sees him as weak. If he retaliates, he starts a war that will bleed his community dry. Either way, we win. The room went quiet again, but this was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of men calculating odds, weighing risks, imagining possibilities. "You do this," Michael said slowly, "and you get your own crew, Harlem crew, under Genevieve's control." Vinny nodded once. "Give me 3 weeks." What Vincent Calibri didn't know, what none of the Genevieve's captains could have predicted, was that a thin, tired-looking man in janitor's coveralls was emptying ashtrays near the door. His name was Marcus. He'd worked at the social club for 6 years, invisible as wallpaper, forgettable as yesterday's newspaper. Marcus heard every word. By midnight, he was sitting in a chair across from Bumpy Johnson, repeating the conversation. Verbatim. Marcus had a gift for memory, a photographic recall that could replay entire conversations like a recording. Bumpy had discovered this talent 5 years earlier and had been paying Marcus $500 a month ever since. Best investment he'd ever made. Bumpy listened without interrupting. His office above Small's Paradise was dim-lit only by a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Behind him, through the window, Harlem pulsed with Friday night energy, music, laughter, life. When Marcus finished, Bumpy reached into his desk drawer, pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, and slid them across the polished wood. "You weren't there," Bumpy said quietly. "You didn't hear anything. Understand?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson." After Marcus left, Bumpy sat alone in the darkness for 2 hours. He didn't move, didn't smoke, didn't drink. Just sat there thinking, calculating, planning. He could kill Vincent Calibri tonight. 1 phone call, 1 bullet. Problem solved. But that wouldn't solve the real problem. The Genevieve's family would just send someone else. The tests would keep coming. The challenges would never stop. No. Bumpy needed to send a message so clear, so undeniable, so terrifying that the Italian mob would never test him again. He needed to make an example that would echo through the underworld for decades. But first he needed to understand his opponent. The next morning, Bumpy sent Junie Bird to Little Italy. Not to fight. Not to threaten. Just to watch. To learn. To gather information. Junie came back with a full report. Vincent Calibri, 28 years old, 6'2", 240 pounds, former Golden Gloves boxer. 7 confirmed bodies, probably more. Quick temper, liked expensive suits and expensive women, drove a black Buick, lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on Hester Street. Most importantly, Vinny was predictable. Same bar every Thursday night, same restaurant every Sunday afternoon, same routine, same patterns, same arrogance that made him think he was untouchable. Bumpy smiled when he heard this. Predictable men made easy targets. 3 days after the Genovese meeting, Bumpy called a meeting of his own. Not in a smoke-filled room, but in a basement beneath a barber shop on 131st Street. 3 men arrived within 5 minutes of each other. Junie Bird, 32 years old, thin as a rail hands that moved faster than most men could track. He'd gotten his nickname because he could pick pockets so smoothly, so cleanly, that people called it light as a bird. But Junie hadn't picked a pocket in 8 years. Now he did more serious work for Bumpy Johnson, Illinois Gordon. 41 years old, built like a brick wall with a face that had absorbed more punches than a boxing bag. He'd moved to Harlem from Chicago in 1935, running from a murder charge that got dropped when the only witness disappeared. Illinois didn't talk much, didn't need to. His reputation spoke for him. Raymond "Quick" Lewis, 29 years old former Army marksman with reflexes that had saved his life in 3 separate shootouts. They called him Quick because once his hand touched his gun, you were already dead. These 3 men had worked for Bumpy Johnson for a combined 17 years. They were loyal, professional, and most importantly, they understood that Bumpy didn't make impulsive decisions. Bumpy stood at the front of the room, his hands in his pockets, his voice calm. In 3 weeks, a man named Vincent Calibri is going to walk into the Apollo Theater and disrespect me in front of 200 people. He paused, letting the words sink in. I want you there. I want you to watch. And when he leaves, I want you to follow him. Junie frowned. Why not just handle him now? Why wait? Bumpy looked at each of them in turn. Because I need witnesses. I need Harlem to see what happens when someone disrespects me in my own house. And I need the Genovese family to understand exactly what kind of man they're dealing with. He pulled out a photograph, placed it on the table. Vincent Calibri, taken outside his apartment building. This man thinks he's going to humiliate me and walk away. He thinks I'll be too afraid to start a war. He's wrong on both counts. Illinois Gordon picked up the photograph, studied it. What do you want us to do with him? I'll tell you when the time comes. For now, just watch. Learn his patterns. Know where he goes, who he talks to, when he's alone. And on March 8th, be at the Apollo. Dress nice. Bring your tools. And when I give the signal, you follow him wherever he goes. Raymond "Quick" Lewis leaned back in his chair. This about respect. Bumpy shook his head. This is about making sure I never have to have this conversation again. They want to test me. Fine. But after this test, there won't be another one. Over the next 3 weeks, Bumpy Johnson became a director preparing for the most important performance of his life. He rehearsed his reactions, practiced his words, calculated his timing down to the second. He hired an actor from the Negro Ensemble Theater, a tall man with an aggressive swagger, and had him play Vincent Calibri. 20 times they ran through the scene, the approach, the insult, the moment of disrespect. Bumpy practiced wiping his face, practiced folding his napkin, practiced standing up, sitting down, controlling his breathing, modulating his voice. Every movement had to be perfect, calculated, cold. Why so precise? Junie asked one afternoon, watching Bumpy practice the same motion for the 15th time. Because precision is the difference between looking weak and looking strategic, Bumpy replied. If I react too fast, I look emotional. If I react too slow, I look scared. But if I react exactly right at exactly the right speed, with exactly the right words, then everyone in that room understands that what they're watching isn't anger, it's judgment. While Bumpy rehearsed in Harlem, Junie, Illinois, and Raymond prepared the warehouse in Red Hook, an abandoned building near the waterfront, far from prying eyes, with concrete walls that absorbed sound and a drain in the center of the floor that led straight to the East River. They didn't install torture devices, didn't set up theatrical displays, just cleared the space, checked the doors, made sure everything was ready. Professional. Efficient. Clean. The night before March 8th, Bumpy sat with his wife Mamie in their apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. The lights were dim. A record played softly on the turntable, Duke Ellington's Mood Indigo. Mamie sat beside him on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. She'd been with Bumpy for 7 years, through wars and negotiations, through victories and losses. She knew her husband better than anyone alive. "You scared?" she asked quietly. "No." "Liar." Bumpy smiled. Mamie was the only person who could call him a liar and live to tell about it. "I'm not scared of what's going to happen," he said. "I'm scared of what I'm becoming." Mamie lifted her head, looked at him. "You're becoming exactly what Harlem needs you to be." "And what's that?" "A man who keeps his promises, a man who protects his people, a man who doesn't back down when someone tries to take what's his." She touched his face gently. "You think I don't know what you're planning. You think I don't understand why you've been practicing in the mirror, timing your movements, rehearsing your words. Mamie, I know you, Bumpy Johnson, and I know that whatever happens tomorrow night at the Apollo, you're doing it because you have to. Because if you don't, they'll keep coming. They'll keep testing, and eventually someone's going to get hurt who doesn't deserve it." Bumpy pulled her close. "I have to do this so I never have to do it again." "I know, baby. I know." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to Duke Ellington, feeling the weight of what was coming. Friday, March 8th, 1941, 7 o'clock at night. Bumpy Johnson arrived at the Apollo Theater 3 hours before Vincent Calibri would make his move. He wore his best suit, charcoal gray with thin pinstripes, a white shirt that Mamie had pressed that morning, and a burgundy tie that matched the handkerchief in his breast pocket. Mamie walked beside him, elegant in her green dress, the one that made her eyes look like emeralds in candlelight. She held his arm, smiling at people they passed, playing her part perfectly. Inside the Apollo, the energy was electric. Friday night in Harlem meant Ella Fitzgerald was performing, and tickets had sold out 2 weeks earlier. 200 people, maybe more. Musicians, hustlers, businessmen, politicians, working folks who'd saved up for a night out. The cream of Harlem society all gathered under one roof. Bumpy took his usual table, table 7. Right side of the stage, perfect view of both entrances, back to the wall. He'd sat at this table every Friday night for the past 4 years. It was his table. Everyone knew it. Nobody else would dare sit there. Mamie slid into the chair beside him, arranged her dress, smiled at the waiter who appeared within seconds. "The usual, Mr. Johnson." "Please, Charles, and whatever my wife wants." Charles nodded, disappeared. He'd been managing the Apollo for 11 years, and he knew better than to ask questions when Bumpy Johnson came to see a show. 3 tables away, Junie Bird sat alone, nursing a whiskey, pretending to read a newspaper. Illinois Gordon leaned against the bar, talking to a woman he'd never met before and would never see again. Raymond Quick Lewis stood near the kitchen entrance, chatting with a waitress, his right hand resting casually near his jacket pocket. To anyone watching, they were just customers. Regular people enjoying a Friday night. But Bumpy knew they were ready. Waiting. Watching. At 10 o'clock, Ella Fitzgerald took the stage. The crowd erupted. Applause rolled through the theater like thunder. Ella smiled, raised one hand for silence, and began to sing a Tisket a Tasket. Her voice filled the room, pure, perfect, like honey poured over velvet. Bumpy watched the entrance, not the stage. He'd heard Ella sing 100 times. Tonight he wasn't here for the music. At 10:15, the heavy oak doors swung open. Vincent Calibri walked in. 4 men followed him, all Italian, all with bulges under their jackets that nobody tried to hide. That was part of the message. We're armed, we're dangerous, and we're not afraid of you. Charles, the manager, rushed to intercept them. "Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but we're at capacity." Vinny shoved him aside. Not hard enough to hurt him, just hard enough to make a point. "We're not staying, just delivering a message." The room began to notice. Conversations dropped to whispers. People turned to watch. The energy changed, shifted, became something darker. Bumpy set down his fork. He'd been eating chicken, cutting each piece methodically, savoring each bite. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, placed it on the table, and looked up. Vincent Calibri stood at the entrance, scanning the room. Their eyes met across 47 feet of polished hardwood floor. Vinny smiled. Started walking. 47 steps from the entrance to Bumpy's table. Bumpy had measured it twice, had walked it himself a dozen times, timing each stride, calculating angles, planning sight lines. Every step Vinny took echoed. The jazz band had stopped playing. Ella Fitzgerald stepped away from the microphone. 200 people held their breath. Vinny reached the table, looked down at Bumpy Johnson like he was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "Bumpy Johnson," Vinny's voice carried, loud enough for half the room to hear. "The great godfather of Harlem." Bumpy didn't respond, just looked at him with those calm, calculating eyes that had made stronger men nervous. "My bosses sent me with a message." Vinny leaned closer. "They said to tell you that Harlem's got new management coming, and if you're smart, you'll step aside now while you still can." Mamie's hand tightened on Bumpy's arm, but Bumpy didn't move, didn't flinch. Just took a slow sip of water, set the glass down gently. "I'm listening," Bumpy said quietly. "You're listening," Vinny laughed. "You're listening like a good little toe." And then he did it. Vincent Calibri leaned over Bumpy Johnson's table and spit directly in his face. The room died. Not just went silent. Died. Like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the Apollo Theater and replaced it with ice water and dread. The spit hit Bumpy's left cheek, ran down toward his jaw, dripped onto his white shirt collar. Mamie gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Junie Bird's hand moved toward his waistband. Illinois Gordon straightened at the bar. Raymond Quick Lewis stepped away from the kitchen door, all three of them ready to turn the Apollo into a slaughterhouse. But Bumpy held up one finger. Wait. He reached for his napkin, the same white linen napkin he'd folded earlier, picked it up slowly, wiped his face with the same methodical precision he'd used to cut his chicken. Vinny was still smiling, but something flickered in his eyes now. Confusion, maybe the first hint of doubt. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't reacting the way he was supposed to. Wasn't angry, wasn't violent. Was too calm. Way too calm. Bumpy stood up. 5'9", facing down, 6'2". But somehow in that moment, Bumpy seemed taller, seemed to fill the entire room with his presence. "Count to 47, Bumpy said quietly. Vinny's smile faltered. "What? 47. Bumpy's voice was soft, almost conversational. "That's how many pieces we're going to find you in." Vinny tried to laugh. "You threatening me in front of all these people, you know who I work for. I know exactly who you work for." Bumpy looked past Vinny to the 4 bodyguards. "And after tonight, they're going to know exactly who I am." He turned his attention back to Vinny. "You 4 behind him. You can leave now. Walk out that door. Go back to Little Italy. Tell Michael Genovese what happened here, or you can stay. And what happens to Vinny happens to you too. Your choice. You got 10 seconds to decide." One of the younger bodyguards looked nervous. "Vinny, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Vinny snapped. He turned back to Bumpy. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't scare me." Bumpy smiled. For the first time that night he smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a warm smile. The kind of smile a shark might give right before it bites. "You should be scared," Bumpy said softly. "Because I just made you a promise, and I always keep my promises." He looked at his watch. "It's 10:32. You've got until 10:33 to walk out that door." Or what or you'll find out why they call me the Godfather of Harlem. 60 seconds. The longest 60 seconds of Vincent Calibri's life. He stood there trying to decide if Bumpy was bluffing, trying to read the room, trying to figure out if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. At 10:33, Vinny Calibri made his decision. He turned and walked toward the exit. His 4 bodyguards followed, relieved, grateful, already planning how they'd tell this story to their friends. Vinny reached the door, pushed it open, stepped out into the Harlem night. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Bumpy sat back down, picked up his fork, cut another piece of chicken, put it in his mouth. Chewed slowly, swallowed. "It's done," he said to Mamie. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, not from sadness, from pride, from fear, from love. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I made a promise," Bumpy said quietly. "Now I'm keeping it." Vinny Calibri thought he'd won, thought he'd humiliated Bumpy Johnson in front of 200 people and walked away alive. Thought he could go back to Little Italy and collect his reward. He had no idea that he'd just walked out of the Apollo Theater and straight into the most carefully planned trap Bumpy Johnson had ever set. He had no idea that Junie Bird was already slipping out the kitchen exit, that Illinois Gordon was heading for the side door, that Raymond Quick Lewis was moving through the crowd toward the back. He had no idea that the next 47 minutes would be his last. 10:33 at night. March 8th, 1941. Vincent Calibri pushed through the Apollo Theater's heavy doors and stepped onto 125th Street. The cold night air hit his face. He'd done it. Spit in Bumpy Johnson's face in front of 200 people. And the great godfather of Harlem had done nothing. His 4 bodyguards followed him out, relief visible on their faces. "I told you," Vinny said, pulling out cigarettes. He's all talk, but his hands were shaking, just slightly. Just enough that it took him 3 tries to light the cigarette. Tony, the youngest bodyguard, noticed. "Boss, maybe we should get out of Harlem, fast." "Go get a cab," Vinny snapped. "Head back to the club. I'm driving myself." "You sure?" "I said get a cab." The 4 bodyguards exchanged glances but didn't argue. They flagged down a taxi, piled in, disappeared into the night. Vinny started walking toward 126th Street, where he'd parked his black Buick. He needed to call Michael Genovese. Report his success. There was a payphone on the corner. Vinny dropped a nickel and dialed the Mulberry Street Social Club. 2 rings. "Get me Michael." 30 seconds. Then Michael Genovese's voice came through sharp. "This better be good news." "It's done." Vinny tried to keep his voice steady. "I spit in his face. Right there in the Apollo. And you know what he did? Nothing. Just sat there and took it." His voice was shaking. He couldn't control it. "Where are you now?" Michael's tone had changed. "Walking to my car." "Listen very carefully, Vincent. Get in your car right now. Don't stop. Drive straight to Little Italy. Do not stop anywhere in Harlem. Understand?" Vinny felt ice crawl up his spine. "Boss, I don't. Just do it. Now." The line went dead. Vinny stood there, phone pressed to his ear, trying to understand. Michael had sounded scared. Why everything had gone according to plan, unless it hadn't. He hung up and walked faster toward 126th Street. His car was halfway down the block, parked between 2 broken streetlights. Dark. Secluded. Private. Now that privacy felt like a trap. The street was empty. Too empty. Where were the usual crowds? The couples? The drunks? Vinny's hand moved to his jacket, fingers closing around his .38. 10 feet from his car. Footsteps behind him. Fast. Getting closer. He spun around, pulling the gun. Too slow. Junie Bird's fist hit his temple. Hard. Precise. Vinny's vision exploded white. His knees buckled. The gun clattered to pavement. Illinois Gordon caught him before he hit the ground. Raymond Quick Lewis opened the trunk of Vinny's own Buick. 47 seconds. From the moment Vinny left the Apollo to the moment he lost consciousness. 47 seconds of freedom. The last 47 seconds Vincent Calibri would ever know. But what happened in those 47 seconds was just the beginning of what Bumpy Johnson had planned. The warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn had been abandoned for 7 years. Rusted machinery, broken windows, a concrete floor with a drain in the center leading straight to the East River. Illinois Gordon drove Vinny's Buick. Junie and Raymond sat silent in back. They'd done this work before, not often. Bumpy Johnson wasn't the type who solved problems with violence. But when violence was necessary, it had to be precise. They pulled into the warehouse at 11 o'clock, dragged Vinny inside, tied him to a chair. Heavy rope, tight knots, professional. Then they waited. Vinny woke at 11:15. His head throbbed. Vision blurry. He tried to move, couldn't. Hands tied behind his back, ankles bound to chair legs. Panic hit like a freight train. He opened his mouth to scream. Tape over his mouth. Just a muffled grunt came out. "You're awake." The voice came from darkness ahead. Calm, quiet, familiar. Vinny's eyes adjusted to the dim light from a single bulb overhead. There, standing 10 feet away, hands in pockets, expression neutral, was Bumpy Johnson. Not angry, not violent, just watching. Bumpy took 3 steps forward, stopped, looked at Vinny like studying a puzzle. "I'm going to take the tape off," Bumpy said quietly. "You can scream if you want. Nobody will hear. We're half a mile from the nearest building. Walls are 2 feet thick. But if you scream, the tape goes back on. Your choice." He nodded to Junie. Junie ripped the tape off. Vinny gasped, started to scream. Bumpy held up one finger. Vinny stopped. Something in that gesture, in Bumpy's calm eyes, in the complete absence of emotion, made him understand that screaming would only make things worse. "Good," Bumpy said. "You can learn." He pulled a wooden crate over, sat down facing Vinny. Close enough to talk, far enough to be safe. "You want to know why you're here?" Vinny's voice cracked. "Please, I was just doing what they told me. It wasn't personal, just business." "You're not here because I'm angry." Bumpy's voice stayed conversational, like discussing weather. "I'm not angry at you, Vincent. I don't even dislike you. I don't know you well enough." "Then why?" "You're here because the world needs to understand who Bumpy Johnson is." Bumpy leaned forward slightly. "The Genovese family thinks they can test me. Send men into my territory to disrespect me in front of my people. They think I'm weak." "I'll tell them," Vinny said quickly. "I'll tell them they're wrong. I'll tell them you're not weak." "You won't tell them anything." Bumpy's voice didn't change, didn't get louder. Just stayed exactly the same. "Because you won't be able to, but they'll get the message anyway." Vinny started crying, not sobbing, just tears running down his face. The kind that come when a man realizes he's already gone. "I have a family, a mother, sisters. Rosa Calibri, Hester Street. Your sisters are Maria and Francesca." Bumpy's voice stayed calm. "I know everything about you, Vincent. Known since the day you agreed to spit in my face." "Then you know I'm just following orders, I know." Bumpy nodded. "But you had a choice. When you stood up in that social club 3 weeks ago, when you volunteered to come into my territory, you made a choice. You chose ambition over safety, a promotion over your life. I didn't think." "No, you didn't." Bumpy stood up. "You didn't think about what would happen if I wasn't weak. If I was exactly as dangerous as my reputation says. You didn't think that men who disrespect me don't just die. They become lessons." He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "I counted 47 people in the Apollo tonight, witnesses to what you did. So there will be 47 pieces of you, one for each witness, so they remember, so everyone in Harlem remembers, so the Genovese family remembers. So nobody ever makes the mistake of thinking they can disrespect Bumpy Johnson and walk away. Vinny's voice broke. "Please, I'm begging. I know," Bumpy said quietly. "But begging won't help. Nothing will. Because I made a promise in front of 200 people, and I always keep my promises." He looked at Junie, Illinois Raymond. 47 minutes. No more, no less. Make it clean. Bumpy Johnson walked out of the warehouse, got into a waiting car, drove back to Harlem, never looked back, never hesitated, never questioned. This wasn't about Vincent Calibri. This was about a message that would echo through the underworld for decades. While 3 men worked in that Red Hook warehouse with cold professionalism understanding, this was just business that needed doing. Bumpy Johnson sat alone in his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. Lights off. Curtains drawn. He sat in his leather chair, the one Mamie bought him 3 years ago, staring at nothing. Mamie found him at midnight. Didn't turn on lights. Just moved through darkness, sat on the arm of his chair, put her hand on his shoulder. "It's done," she asked quietly. "It's being done. How do you feel?" Silence. Long silence. "Like I just became exactly what they always said I was." "And what's that?" "The most dangerous man in Harlem." Mamie slid into his lap, wrapped arms around his neck, pressed her face against his chest. "You're still the man I married. Still the man who brings me flowers every Sunday. Who reads to neighborhood kids. Who paid for Mrs. Henderson's surgery. That man just ordered another man cut into 47 pieces. That man just protected everyone in Harlem from a war that would have ended hundreds of lives." Mamie pulled back, looked at him in darkness. "You think I don't understand. You think I don't know what this cost you, but you did what you had to. Now it's done. And you come back to me." Bumpy held her tight. Didn't speak. Just held her. The clock on the wall ticked. 11:10. 11:15. 11:20. At exactly 11:20 that night, the work in Red Hook finished. Junie Bird, Illinois, Gordon Raymond Quick Lewis cleaned the warehouse, washed the floor. No evidence, no trace. Nothing connecting them or Bumpy Johnson to what happened. Then they loaded 47 carefully wrapped packages into 3 different cars and began distributing them across New York City. Not randomly. Strategically. Each location chosen to send a specific message. The silence in that Harlem apartment was heavy. Thick, like the air before a storm breaks. Saturday, March 9th, 1941, 6 o'clock in the morning. Donald Pierce, a sanitation worker, was emptying dumpsters behind a restaurant in Red Hook when he found the first package, small brown paper tied with twine. He opened it, dropped it, vomited, called police. By noon, NYPD had found 6 more packages, different locations, different boroughs, all containing pieces of Vincent Calibri, each package identical, each containing a small piece of paper with a number, 1 of 47, 3 of 47, 12 of 47. Sunday, March 10th, 1941. 15 more pieces discovered, a foot in the East River, a hand in a Brooklyn trash can. Other pieces scattered across the Bronx and Queens, each wrapped identically, each numbered. NYPD detectives began understanding what they were looking at. This wasn't random. This wasn't madness. This was calculated, precise, mathematical. This was a message. Monday, March 11th, 1941, 8 o'clock morning. Vincent Calibri's head was found in a trash can on Mulberry Street, right outside the Genovese Family Social Club, right where Michael Genovese would see it arriving for morning coffee. The paper inside said 47 of 47. By Monday afternoon, every New York newspaper ran the story. Mobster found dismembered. Body scattered across city. Police baffled. But nobody in the underworld was baffled. They all knew exactly what happened, exactly who was responsible, exactly what it meant. The message had been delivered. Detective James Morrison had been with NYPD 23 years, investigated hundreds of cases, solved most. He was good, thorough, didn't give up easy, but interviewing witnesses about the Vincent Calibri case, he hit a wall. 200 people in the Apollo Theater that night. 200 witnesses. Morrison interviewed 137 over 3 days. Every single one gave the same answer. I don't remember anything. I didn't see what happened. I was watching the stage. I don't know who you're talking about. Morrison knew they were lying, knew they'd seen something, but he understood why they wouldn't talk. In Harlem, you didn't testify against Bumpy Johnson, not if you wanted to keep breathing. Tuesday afternoon, Morrison sat at a small coffee shop on 135th Street. Neutral ground, public, safe. Bumpy Johnson walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. Gray suit, white shirt, no tie. Looked like a businessman. Slid into the booth across from Morrison, nodded to the waitress. Coffee, black, thank you. Morrison waited until she left. You know why I wanted to meet? I can guess. Vincent Calibri. 47 pieces. 3 boroughs. Every witness suddenly can't remember anything. Morrison leaned forward. I know you did it. I know you did it. How you did it. Why you did it. Morrison's voice stayed quiet. What I don't know is how to prove it. Bumpy sipped his coffee. Then it sounds like you don't know anything that matters. This was planned, calculated. A statement. If I made a statement, Bumpy said quietly. What do you think that statement was? Morrison studied him. That you're not to be tested. And do you think the people who tested me learned that lesson? Vincent Calibri learned it. Good. Bumpy set down his cup. Then my hypothetical statement was successful. Silence. I have a family, Morrison said. Wife, 2 daughters, 1 starting college next year. Congratulations, you must be proud. I am. Morrison met Bumpy's eyes. And I'd like to keep being around to be proud. Then I suggest you close this case. Bumpy's voice stayed quiet. File a report saying, despite extensive investigation, you couldn't identify suspects. Move on to cases you might actually solve. And if I don't, then you'll spend the rest of your career investigating something you'll never solve. Waste months, maybe years, chasing evidence that doesn't exist. At the end, you'll have nothing except knowing you pursued a case everyone told you to drop. Bumpy left a $5 bill on the table. Or you could spend that time with your daughters. Watch your eldest go to college. Be there for your family. He picked up his hat. Your choice, Detective Morrison. Choose wisely. Morrison watched him leave. Sat there 20 minutes more, drinking cold coffee, thinking about his daughters, his pension, all the reasons some cases were better left unsolved. Wednesday, March the 12th, Detective Morrison filed his final report. Despite extensive investigation, no viable suspects identified. Case remains open but inactive pending new evidence. The file closed 72 hours after the first piece was discovered. That same Wednesday, the Genovese family held emergency meeting in the Mulberry Street Social Club back room. Michael Genovese sat at the table head, face pale, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. 8 captains sat in silence, none willing to speak first. Michael broke the silence. Bumpy Johnson just ended one of our men and scattered him across the city like trash. We can't let this stand. Nobody responded. Say something, Michael demanded. Somebody say something. Salvatore, the oldest captain, cleared his throat. What do you want us to say, Michael? That we should go to war, send more men into Harlem. I want you to act like we're the Genovese family, like we don't back down. Vincent didn't back down, another captain said quietly. Look where that got him. The door opened. Frank Costello walked in. Not officially Genovese family anymore, moved to his own operations after Lucky Luciano went to prison. but asked to come as consultant, as someone who dealt with Bumpy Johnson before and survived. Costello sat, lit a cigar, looked around. "Let me guess," he said. "Michael wants revenge. Everyone else wants to forget this happened." "We can't ignore this," Michael said. "He ended Vinny, cut him into 47 pieces." "Exactly 47, Costello said. "You notice that, not 45, not 50. Exactly 47. Know why?" Silence. Because Bumpy Johnson counted. Every person in that theater, every witness to what Vinny did, made sure there was one piece for each, so they'd remember. So everyone would understand this wasn't random, this was mathematics. Strategy. "So what?" Michael demanded. "We're supposed to be impressed." "No," Costello said quietly. "We're supposed to be smart. Smart enough to understand we're not dealing with some street thug. We're dealing with a man who thinks 10 moves ahead, who plans everything, who doesn't act from emotion but calculation." He leaned forward. "You sent Vinny to test Bumpy. See if he'd back down. See if he was weak. Now you know. He's not weak. He's the opposite, and if you go to war with him, you're going to lose." "We're the Genovese family," Michael said. "We don't lose." "You will with Bumpy Johnson." Costello's voice was firm. "I've negotiated with him, sat across from him, tried to outthink him. Know what I learned? He's always 3 steps ahead. Always. You think you're making a smart move, he already predicted it. You think you've got him cornered, you're already in his trap." A younger captain spoke up. "So what do we do? Just let him get away with ending Vinny?" "Vinny got himself gone," Costello said bluntly. "He volunteered for this. Walked into Bumpy's territory, disrespected him, thought he'd walk away. That's not Bumpy's fault. That's Vinny being stupid." Michael started to protest. Costello held up a hand. "Listen carefully. All of you. Harlem belongs to Bumpy Johnson, his territory, his people, his rules. The only reason we've operated anywhere near it is because he's allowed us to. Not because we're strong, because he's been gracious." "Gracious," Michael's voice rose. "He just made an example, yes, because we pushed him, tested him, tried to take what's his. Now we've learned the lesson Vinny gave his life to teach." Costello stood. "Leave Harlem alone. Find your money somewhere else. Because trying to take Harlem from Bumpy Johnson will cost more than it's worth." Silence. Every man knew Costello was right. They'd seen what Bumpy could do. The precision, the planning, the complete absence of hesitation. Michael wanted to argue, wanted to demand revenge, prove he was strong enough to lead. But looking around the table, he saw fear in his captain's eyes. If he pushed this demanded war with Bumpy Johnson, he'd be fighting alone. "Fine," Michael said quietly. "Harlem is off limits. We find our money somewhere else." The captains nodded, relieved. Costello walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "One more thing. Send Bumpy a message. Tell him we understand. Tell him there won't be more tests. Tell him we respect his territory." "You want us to apologize?" Michael was incredulous. "I want you to survive," Costello replied. "There's no shame in respecting a worthy opponent. Only shame in being stupid enough to fight a war you can't win." He left. Meeting ended. The Genovese family quietly, officially, permanently gave up any claim to Harlem. And somewhere in that silence, the balance of power in New York's underworld shifted forever. While the Genovese family held their council of surrender, Bumpy Johnson sat alone in his office above Small's paradise. Lights off. Only street glow illuminated the room. On his desk sat a framed photograph. Wedding day. Bumpy in black tuxedo, Mamie in white lace, both smiling like they'd won the lottery. He picked up the photograph, stared at it. "Am I still that man?" he whispered to empty room. Door opened. Mamie walked in, moved through darkness like she could see, sat on his desk edge. "You're wondering if you've become a monster," she said quietly. Have I? You did what you had to do, what nobody else had strength to do. Protected Harlem, protected our people, our future. She took the photograph from his hands. This man in this picture, he's still you. Always will be. Because that man understood that sometimes love means making hard choices. Sometimes protection means doing terrible things. 47 pieces, Mamie. 47 pieces that prevented a war, prevented hundreds gone, prevented Harlem from burning. She took his face in her hands. You did what you had to do. Now come back to me. Come back from that warehouse. Come back from that darkness. Come back to the man who brings me flowers and reads to children and helps old ladies cross the street. Bumpy closed his eyes. What if I can't? You can, because I know you. You're not defined by the worst thing you've ever done. You're defined by everything else. Every act of kindness, every moment of gentleness, every time you chose mercy when you could have chosen violence. I just chose violence, once, after being tested and pushed and disrespected. After exhausting every other option, Mamie kissed his forehead. That doesn't make you a monster. Makes you human. A human doing an impossible job in an impossible world. Bumpy opened his eyes, pulled her close, held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. Maybe she was. Outside, Harlem continued its rhythm. Music from clubs, laughter from street corners, life going on. But something had changed. Something fundamental. Something that would echo for decades. The 47 pieces had been found. Vincent Calibri had disappeared. But what Bumpy Johnson created wasn't just fear. It was a legacy that would change the Underworld's history forever. The Apollo Theater reopened 1 week after Vincent Calibri disappeared. Friday night. Ella Fitzgerald on stage again. The same crowd. The same energy. But something had changed. Table 7 remained empty. Not because it was closed. Not because someone reserved it. It stayed empty because nobody dared sit there. Not that night. Not the next week. Not ever again. Charles, the Apollo's manager, understood what that table had become. Not just furniture, a monument, a reminder. 3 months later, Charles commissioned a small bronze plaque. Simple, elegant, no names, no details. Just 8 words that said everything. Respect is earned. March 8, 1941. He mounted it beside table 7. And that table became something more than a place to sit. It became a pilgrimage site for the underworld. Gangsters from Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia would come to Harlem, stop at the Apollo stand beside that empty table, and understand what real power looked like. Not the power of guns or numbers, the power of precision, of calculation, of a promise kept no matter the cost. From March 1941 until his death in July 1968, nobody touched Harlem. 27 years, not the Italians, not the Irish, not anyone. Because everyone understood that Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson, and Bumpy had proven with mathematical precision exactly what happened to people who forgot. But the most remarkable thing wasn't the fear Bumpy inspired, it was what he built with it. He became the Underworld's arbitrator. When disputes arose between families, between crews, between men who would otherwise solve disagreements with bullets, they came to Bumpy. Sat across from him, laid out their grievances, and Bumpy would listen, think, calculate, then render judgment. His decisions were final, binding. Because everyone knew that disagreeing meant becoming the next cautionary tale. Peace through precision, order through demonstration. A kingdom built not on constant violence, but on one perfect, terrible example that echoed through decades. In 1943, 2 years after Vincent Calibri's pieces were found, Bumpy established a scholarship fund, the 47 Foundation, for Harlem's children whose parents couldn't afford college. The fund supported 347 students over 25 years. Exactly 47 times 7. 7 for the locations where Vinny's pieces were found, 47 for the promise kept. When asked why, Bumpy's answer was always the same: so they don't have to choose the path I chose. 3 lessons emerged from that night at the Apollo. 3 principles that defined Bumpy Johnson's approach to power. First, patience defeats violence. Bumpy waited 3 weeks after learning about the Genovese plan. 3 weeks of preparation. Planning. When Vincent Calibri spit in his face, Bumpy didn't react with immediate fury. He responded with calculated precision. Second, words without action are just noise. When Bumpy said, "Count to 47, he meant it. Not 46, not 48. Exactly 47. His promise wasn't metaphor, it was contract, statement of fact. Third, no. When to stop. Bumpy could have destroyed the entire Genovese family, had the connections, the resources, the justification. But he didn't. He made his point, delivered his message, then stopped. Unnecessary war is weakness, not strength. July 7, 1968. Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack at Wells Restaurant in Harlem. He was 62 years old, died the way he lived. Quietly, without drama. The funeral drew thousands: teachers, shopkeepers, parents whose children had received scholarships, old ladies Bumpy had helped, young men he'd mentored away from violence. Frank Costello attended. Ancient, now 77 years old, walked with a cane, placed white roses beside the casket. The card said simply, "To a worthy opponent." Mamie Johnson stood beside the casket, elegant in black, accepting condolences with grace. She would live another 41 years, dying in 2009 at age 94. Never remarried. Never left Harlem. When asked why she stayed, her answer never changed: "Because this is my husband's legacy, and I won't abandon it." In 2024, a young journalist named Marcus Chen found Tommy Williams in a Harlem nursing home. Tommy was 90 years old now the shoeshine boy who'd witnessed everything that March night in 1941. "What do you remember about Bumpy Johnson?" Chen asked. Tommy smiled, the kind of smile that holds 83 years of secrets. "I remember that he taught me real power doesn't need to be loud." Tommy said, "Everyone today is shouting, posting, broadcasting, trying to prove how tough they are." He paused, looked out at modern Harlem. "But Bumpy taught me that real power is precise, quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just is." And the 47 pieces. That wasn't about cruelty. That was about clarity. Tommy's eyes focused on something far away. Bumpy was making a point that couldn't be misunderstood. He was drawing a line and making absolutely certain everyone knew where that line was. Was he a good man? Tommy considered this. He was a man who understood the world he lived in, who made hard choices in an impossible situation, who protected his people the only way he knew how. Did you ever ask him if he regretted it? Once, years later, I asked him straight out. Tommy's voice dropped. He said, "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the world required that kind of lesson. But I don't regret doing what was necessary, because regret without action is just self-pity, and self-pity never protected anyone." The sun was setting over Harlem when Chen left. He walked past the Apollo Theater. Table 7 still there, the bronze plaque still mounted on the wall. A young couple sat nearby laughing, enjoying the show, completely unaware of the history 3 feet away. That was how it should be. The violence buried, the lessons remembered, the peace preserved. The 47 pieces weren't about death. They were about life, about creating a world where that level of violence became unnecessary, where respect was given freely, because everyone understood the cost of withholding it. Bumpy Johnson wasn't a hero. He was a man who understood that sometimes one terrible lesson prevents 1,000 smaller tragedies. That sometimes the price of peace is one perfect, precise demonstration of what happens when peace is violated. 83 years after that March night in 1941, we still remember Bumpy Johnson's name. Not because of who he hurt, not because of how he did it, but because he taught the world something fundamental about power and respect. He taught us that real strength doesn't announce itself, doesn't threaten, doesn't bluster. It simply keeps its promises, all of them, no matter the cost. And that lesson, purchased with 47 pieces scattered across New York City, remains as true today as it was the night Vincent Calibri walked out of the Apollo Theater and into history. Respect is earned, not demanded, not taken, earned. March 8, 1941, the night one man proved that truth with mathematical precision. The night 47 pieces became a legend. The night Bumpy Johnson showed the world what respect really means.